The stagecoach rattled into Placerville, California on a blistering afternoon in July of 1873, carrying a woman who believed her future husband would take one look at her and send her back east on the next available transport. Victoria Zimmerman pressed her gloved hands against her ribs, feeling the raised tissue beneath the layers of cotton and wool, scars that mapped a history she had tried desperately to leave behind in Philadelphia. She was 22 years old, a mail-order bride traveling 2,000 miles to marry a rancher named Isaac Jameson, a man who had written her letters filled with decent words and careful promises, but who knew nothing of the fire that had stolen her family and marked her body forever. The town sprawled before her in shades of brown and gold, buildings weathered by mountain winds and mining camp origins. Placerville had grown from its gold rush days into something more permanent, though the rough edges remained visible in the saloons that lined the main street and the lean, hard-eyed men who watched the stagecoach arrive. Victoria gathered her carpetbag and stepped down onto the dusty street, her dark blue traveling dress already covered in a fine layer of California dirt. She searched the faces of the waiting crowd, looking for the man whose photograph she carried tucked inside her bodice, a tintype showing a serious-faced cowboy with dark hair and eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera. "Miss Zimmerman." The voice came from her left, and she turned to find him standing there in the flesh, taller than she had imagined, with shoulders broad enough to block out the harsh sunlight. Isaac Jameson removed his hat, revealing hair the color of strong coffee and a face weathered by outdoor work but still young, perhaps 26 or 27. His eyes were the deep brown she remembered from the photograph, but they held a warmth the tintype had not captured. "I am pleased to finally meet you. I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," Victoria said, her voice steadier than she felt, "but I am here now." Isaac reached for her bag, his movements careful and polite. "The Reverend is expecting us at 4 o'clock if you are ready. I thought perhaps you might want to freshen up first at the boarding house, or we could get something to eat. Whatever makes you most comfortable." She studied him for a moment, this stranger she had agreed to marry based on an exchange of letters, and the desperate need to start over somewhere no one knew her story. He seemed kind, his voice gentle despite the rough edges of a Western accent. But kindness could evaporate quickly when faced with ugliness, and Victoria knew exactly how ugly her scars appeared to anyone who saw them. "I would prefer to proceed with the ceremony," she said quietly. "There is no reason to delay." Something flickered across Isaac's face, an emotion she could not quite read, but he nodded and gestured toward the church at the far end of the street. They walked in silence, Victoria acutely aware of the curious stares from townspeople who paused in doorways and on boardwalks to watch the mail-order bride make her way to her wedding. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, a skill she had perfected during the months after the fire when neighbors had whispered and pointed at the girl, who survived when her parents and younger brother had not. The church was small and simple, its whitewashed walls a stark contrast to the raw lumber of the surrounding buildings. Reverend Patterson waited inside with his wife, who served as witness alongside the church organist. The ceremony lasted perhaps 10 minutes, words about love and duty and Christian obligation washing over Victoria like water she could not quite feel. When Isaac slipped the gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady and warm. When he kissed her at the Reverend's instruction, it was a brief, chaste press of lips that told her nothing about what he truly expected from their marriage. "Welcome to Placerville, Mrs. Jameson," the Reverend's wife said afterward, embracing Victoria with genuine warmth. "Isaac is a good man. You will be very happy here, I am certain of it." Victoria managed a smile and thanked her, tucking away the words like a talisman she might need later. Isaac collected her bag again and led her outside to where a wagon waited, hitched to two sturdy horses. "The ranch is about 5 miles out," he explained as he helped her onto the bench seat. "I raise cattle mostly, some horses. The house is not fancy, but it is solid and has a good well. I think you will find it acceptable." "I am sure it will be fine," Victoria said, arranging her skirts as Isaac climbed up beside her. The wagon lurched into motion, carrying them away from town and into the rolling foothills that stretched toward the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance. The landscape was nothing like Philadelphia, all golden grass and scattered oaks instead of brick buildings and cobblestone streets. The air smelled different too, dry and sharp with the scent of sun-baked earth and wild sage. Isaac handled the horses with easy confidence, his attention on the rutted road ahead. After several minutes of silence, he cleared his throat. "I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you right away. I know this is strange for both of us, marrying like this. I thought maybe we could take some time to get to know each other properly before we worry about the other aspects of marriage." Heat flooded Victoria's cheeks, but she felt a rush of relief so intense it made her dizzy. "That would be appreciated," she managed. "Thank you for your understanding." "I figured we could start as friends and see where that leads us," Isaac continued, his eyes still on the road. "I have been alone on the ranch for 3 years now since my father passed. I will not lie and say I am not hoping for a real marriage eventually, with all that entails. But I want it to be something we both want, not just an obligation you feel forced to fulfill." His words were so unexpected, so different from what she had braced herself for, that Victoria found herself blinking back sudden tears. She had prepared herself for demands, for a man who would claim his rights as a husband regardless of her comfort. Instead, Isaac Jameson was offering her time and kindness, gifts she had not dared hope for. "You are very generous," she said softly. "More than I expected." Isaac glanced at her then, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I am just practical. A marriage built on respect has a better chance than one built on force. My parents taught me that much at least." The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill, a collection of buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running silver through the middle distance. The house itself was larger than Victoria had anticipated. 2 stories of solid wood construction, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and side. A barn stood nearby, painted red by someone with an eye for tradition, and several corrals held horses that lifted their heads to watch the wagon approach. It was beautiful in a raw, unpolished way, this piece of California that was now supposed to be her home. Isaac pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Victoria down, his hands respectful on her waist. "Let me show you inside," he said, carrying her bag up the porch steps. The front door opened into a main room that served as both parlor and dining area, furnished simply but comfortably with sturdy chairs and a table that could seat 6. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows on either side let in the golden afternoon light. "Kitchen is through there," Isaac indicated a doorway to the left. "My bedroom is upstairs, first door on the right. I have prepared the second bedroom for you, right across the hall. You can do whatever you like with it, change anything that does not suit you." He led her up a narrow staircase to a hallway with 4 doors. The room he showed her was painted a soft cream color, with a brass bed covered in a wedding ring quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a small writing desk beneath the window. It was more than she had expected, this private space that would be entirely hers. "It is lovely," Victoria said, setting her carpetbag on the bed. "Thank you, Isaac. "I will leave you to settle in," he said from the doorway. "I need to tend to the evening chores, but I will be back in about an hour. There is bread and cheese in the kitchen if you are hungry, and the pump is just outside the back door for fresh water." After he left, Victoria stood in the center of her new room and let herself breathe for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. She removed her traveling dress and washed the dust from her face and hands, then unpacked her meager belongings into the wardrobe. All of her dresses were high-necked and long-sleeved, even the simple cotton ones meant for hot weather. She had learned to dress for concealment rather than comfort, a habit that had become second nature over the past 5 years. That evening, Isaac returned as promised and prepared a simple meal of fried ham, potatoes, and biscuits left over from his breakfast. They ate at the kitchen table, the conversation cautious but not uncomfortable. He asked about her journey, and she told him about the train ride across the plains and the stagecoach through the mountains. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle he was preparing to drive to market in Sacramento come autumn, about the neighbors scattered throughout the valley who would likely come calling once word spread that he had brought home a bride. "You ride?" Isaac asked as he cleared their plates. "I did once, as a child," Victoria admitted. "It has been many years. I could teach you again if you like. It would give you more freedom to explore the property, and it is good to know how in case of emergency." He paused, his hands still on the dishes. "I want you to feel at home here, Victoria. I want you to feel safe and free to be yourself." The words were so earnest, so genuinely kind, that Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest. This man barely knew her, yet he was offering her things she had not dared dream of having again. But he did not know the truth of what she carried beneath her carefully buttoned dresses, did not know that her body was a map of pain and survival that would likely repulse him if he ever saw it. "You are very kind," she whispered, not trusting herself to say more. The days fell into a pattern after that. Isaac rose before dawn to tend the animals and work on the endless tasks required to keep a ranch running. Victoria took over the domestic duties, cooking meals and cleaning the house, and discovering a garden plot behind the kitchen that had been neglected, but could be revived with attention. The work was different from her previous life as a seamstress in her aunt's shop, more physical, but also more satisfying in ways she had not anticipated. Isaac was true to his word about taking time. He did not push for physical intimacy, did not even try to kiss her again after that first chaste touch at the altar. But he talked to her every evening over dinner, asking about her day and sharing stories about his own childhood on the ranch, about his parents who had come west in the early days of the gold rush and stayed to build something lasting. He made her laugh with tales of stubborn cattle and clever horses, and he listened with genuine interest when she shared careful, edited versions of her life in Philadelphia. 2 weeks into her new life, Victoria woke in the middle of the night screaming, tangled in her sheets and gasping for air. In her nightmare, she was back in the burning house, smoke filling her lungs while flames consumed the wallpaper and ceiling beams crashed down around her. She could hear her mother's voice calling her name, could feel the heat searing her skin through her nightgown. Her bedroom door flew open, and Isaac burst in with a lamp held high, his hair wild from sleep and his feet bare beneath hastily pulled-on trousers. "Victoria, what is wrong? Are you hurt?" She could not answer, could only sit there shaking while tears streamed down her face. Isaac set the lamp on her bedside table and sat carefully on the edge of her mattress, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his solid presence. "You are safe," he said quietly. "Whatever you dreamed, it cannot hurt you here. You are safe." "I am sorry," Victoria managed through her tears. "I did not mean to wake you." "Do not apologize for nightmares," Isaac said firmly. "We all have them. God knows I have woken screaming more than once myself." He waited until her breathing steadied, then asked gently, "Do you want to talk about it?" Victoria shook her head, unable to put words to the images that still flickered behind her eyelids. Isaac nodded as if he understood and stood up. "I will leave the lamp. If you need anything, I am just across the hall." He paused at the door, his expression troubled in the flickering light. "You do not have to carry your burdens alone, Victoria. I meant what I said in my letters about wanting a true partnership. That includes sharing the hard things, not just the easy ones." After he left, Victoria lay awake until dawn, thinking about his words and the genuine concern in his voice. She had spent so long hiding her pain, convinced that showing vulnerability would only drive people away. But Isaac seemed different, seemed like a man who might actually mean what he said about partnership and sharing burdens. The question was whether she could find the courage to trust him with the truth. The nightmare returned the following night and the night after that, until Victoria dreaded going to sleep. Isaac heard her every time, and every time he came to check on her, sitting on the edge of her bed until she calmed and offering quiet reassurance without demanding explanations. On the fourth night, when he appeared in her doorway with his lamp and his sleep-rumpled hair and his patient brown eyes, Victoria finally broke. "There was a fire," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "5 years ago in Philadelphia. Our house caught fire in the night from a lamp my father had left burning in his study. My mother, my father, my little brother Thomas, they all died. I was the only one who survived." Isaac set down his lamp and moved closer, his whole attention focused on her. "I am so sorry, Victoria. That is a terrible loss to carry." "The fire burned me," she continued, unable to stop now that she had started. "My nightgown caught fire, and by the time the neighbors pulled me out of the house, the damage was done. I have scars all along my ribs and back, ugly raised marks that never healed properly. I am not whole the way a wife should be for her husband. That is why I answered your advertisement. No man in Philadelphia would have me once he saw what I look like beneath my clothes." She waited for him to recoil, to show disgust or disappointment or any of the reactions she had imagined over the long journey west. Instead, Isaac reached out slowly and took one of her hands in both of his touch gentle but firm. "Look at me, Victoria," he said quietly. When she raised her eyes to his, she saw no revulsion, only a deep sadness mixed with something that might have been anger on her behalf. "Those scars are proof that you survived something terrible. They are proof of your strength, not your weakness. Any man who would reject you for carrying the marks of survival is a fool who does not deserve you." "You say that now," Victoria said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But you have not seen them. They are hideous, Isaac. They cover so much of my body. I am ashamed every time I look at myself in the mirror." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I have scars too, from a cattle drive that went wrong 3 years ago. A steer charged me and knocked me into a barbed wire fence. The wire tore up my shoulder and chest pretty badly. The doctor said I was lucky it missed anything vital, but the scars are not pretty to look at. I have been self-conscious about them, wondered if a wife would find them off-putting." Victoria stared at him, startled by this revelation. Isaac met her gaze steadily, then slowly unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of his nightshirt and pulled the fabric aside. Even in the lamplight, she could see the raised, twisted scars that covered his left shoulder and upper chest, pale lines against his tanned skin. "We are both marked by the things that tried to kill us," he said quietly. "But we survived, Victoria. We are still here, still living. That is what matters." Something shifted in Victoria's chest, a loosening of the tight knot of shame she had carried for so long. "You really do not care about my scars." "I care that you were hurt," Isaac said firmly. "I care that you lost your family in a terrible way, but the scars themselves, they are just part of your story, part of what made you brave enough to come west and start over with a stranger. If anything, they make me respect you more, not less." Victoria found herself leaning toward him, drawn by his steadiness and warmth. "I have been so afraid to let anyone see," she whispered. "Afraid that you would be disappointed in what you got when you sent for a mail-order bride." Isaac released her hand and gently cupped her face, his calloused palms warm against her skin. "I sent for a wife, a partner, someone to share my life with. I got a woman who is brave and strong and kind, who survived hell and still found the courage to hope for something better. You are more than I dared hope for, scars or no scars." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and kissed her softly. This kiss was different from the one at their wedding, deeper and more genuine, a promise rather than a formality. Victoria kissed him back, tasting salt from her tears and feeling something warm unfold in her chest. When they finally pulled apart, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "We can take this as slow as you need," he murmured. "But I want you to know that I already care for you, Victoria. These past 2 weeks, getting to know you, watching you bring life back to this house, it has been the best time I have had since losing my parents. I think we could be truly happy together if you are willing to trust me." "I want to trust you," Victoria said honestly. "I am just not sure I know how anymore." "Then we will learn together," Isaac said simply. He stood up and pulled the quilt higher around her shoulders. "Try to sleep. I will leave my door open so I can hear if you need me. Tomorrow is Saturday, and I thought maybe we could ride out to the creek for a picnic if the weather holds. Would you like that?" Victoria nodded, feeling exhausted but also lighter than she had in years. "I would like that very much." The nightmares continued, but their power over her began to fade as Isaac consistently showed up every time she woke in terror, offering comfort without judgment. During the days, they fell into an easy companionship that felt less like the awkward dance of strangers, and more like the comfortable rhythm of friends who had known each other for years. Isaac taught her to ride again on a gentle mare named Daisy, patiently correcting her seat and showing her how to communicate with the horse through weight and touch rather than force. They took their picnic to the creek on a warm Saturday afternoon, spreading a blanket under the shade of a massive oak tree while the water burbled over smooth stones nearby. Isaac had packed bread and cheese and apples, and Victoria had made a dried apple cake that turned out better than expected. They ate lazily, talking about nothing and everything, and when Isaac lay back on the blanket with his hands behind his head, Victoria surprised herself by lying down beside him. "This is beautiful country," she said, watching the oak leaves shift and dance in the breeze. "So different from the city." "Do you miss Philadelphia?" Isaac asked. Victoria considered the question honestly. "I miss some things. The museums, the libraries, the shops. But mostly I miss who I was before the fire, when I still had my family and my future seemed clear. I do not miss the city itself so much. What was your future supposed to be?" Isaac rolled onto his side, propping his head on his hand so he could look at her. "I was supposed to marry a clerk named Martin who worked at my uncle's law firm," Victoria said. "We were engaged when the fire happened. Afterward, when I finally healed enough to leave the hospital, Martin came to visit me once. He took one look at the bandages still covering half my body and said he could not go through with the wedding. He said it would not be fair to either of us to marry when I was so damaged." Isaac's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. That man was a coward and a fool. He was honest, Victoria countered. Many men would have gone through with the wedding out of obligation and then resented me for the rest of our lives. At least Martin had the decency to be direct about his feelings. Honesty delivered without kindness is just cruelty, Isaac said firmly. And any man who would abandon his fiancée when she needed him most does not deserve to be defended. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch achingly gentle. I am glad he was too much of a fool to see your worth, though, because it meant you were free to come here, to give me a chance I probably do not deserve but am grateful for nonetheless. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not look away from his steady gaze. You have been kinder to me in 3 weeks than Martin was in 2 years of courtship. I think perhaps things worked out the way they were meant to. Isaac smiled, a full, genuine expression that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. I am starting to think the same thing. He hesitated, then asked carefully, Victoria, would it be all right if I courted you properly? I know we are already married, which makes it somewhat backward, but I would like to do this right. Take you on rides, bring you flowers, tell you all the reasons I am falling for you. Would that be acceptable? Something warm and bright bloomed in Victoria's chest. I would like that very much, she whispered. Isaac courted her with the same steady determination he brought to everything else in his life. He picked wildflowers and left them on her breakfast plate. He carved her a small wooden bird that sat on her writing desk. He took her on evening rides through the Golden Hills, pointing out the places he had played as a child and sharing stories about his parents and their dreams for the ranch. He complimented her cooking and thanked her for the way she had organized the chaos of his bachelor household into something more like a real home. But more than the gestures, Isaac courted her with his presence and attention. He listened when she talked about missing her mother's laugh or her brother's endless energy. He shared his own grief about losing his parents, his father to a heart attack and his mother to pneumonia barely 6 months later. They discovered a shared love of reading and began spending evenings on the porch, taking turns reading aloud from the books that lined the shelves in the parlor. 6 weeks into their marriage, Victoria found herself watching Isaac work in the corral, admiring the way his muscles flexed beneath his shirt as he gentled a young horse to accept a saddle. She realized with a start that she was attracted to her husband, that she wanted his touch in ways that went beyond the chaste kisses they had been sharing. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying because it meant she would eventually have to let him see her fully, to reveal the extent of her scarring and trust that he meant what he said about accepting her as she was. That night after dinner, Victoria asked Isaac to come sit with her on the porch. The sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, and took a deep breath. I want to show you, she said quietly. The scars. I want you to see them so you know exactly what you are committing to when you say you accept me. Isaac turned to face her fully, his expression serious. You do not have to prove anything to me, Victoria. I already know what I am committing to. I am committing to you, to the woman you are, scars included. I know, Victoria said, but I need to do this for myself. I need to stop hiding, at least from you. I need to know that you have seen the worst and still want me. Isaac squeezed her hand gently. I will see whatever you want to show me, and I promise you that nothing I see will change how I feel about you. But let us go inside where we have privacy. They went upstairs to her room, and Victoria lit 2 lamps so the space was well illuminated. Her hands shook as she reached for the buttons on her dress, but Isaac sat patiently in the chair by her writing desk, his attention focused entirely on her. She turned her back to him and undid the row of tiny buttons, then let the dress fall to the floor. Her corset came next, and then her chemise, until she stood in only her thin cotton drawers and stockings. The scars covered her right side, a twisted landscape of raised tissue that started at her hip and spread up her ribs to her shoulder blade. The worst of it was under her right arm and along her side, where the burning fabric had clung longest before the neighbors tore it away. The skin was discolored in patches, some areas pale white and others an angry red that had never faded. She could feel Isaac's gaze on her exposed skin and fought the urge to cover herself with her arms. "Victoria," Isaac said softly. She heard him stand and cross the room until he was right behind her. "May I touch you?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. His fingers came to rest lightly on her left shoulder, the unmarked side, and slowly traced a path down her spine. Then he moved to her right side, his touch careful and reverent as he explored the damaged skin. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Not anymore," Victoria managed. Sometimes the skin feels tight and the scarred areas are less sensitive than normal skin, but it does not hurt the way it did when the burns were fresh. Isaac's hand continued its gentle exploration, learning the geography of her survival. "You are beautiful," he said quietly. "Every inch of you is beautiful because every inch is proof that you survived, that you fought to live when it would have been easier to give up. I am in awe of your strength, Victoria." She turned to face him then, tears streaming down her face, and found his expression open and honest. There was no disgust, no revulsion, only tenderness and something deeper that made her heart race. "You truly do not mind." "I truly do not mind," Isaac confirmed. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her slowly, thoroughly, until she was breathless and clinging to his shoulders. "In fact, I would very much like to make this a real marriage in every way if you want that too, but only if you are ready. I will wait as long as you need." Victoria looked into his brown eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and desire tempered with patience. This man had courted her, had listened to her nightmares and held her through her tears, had seen her at her most vulnerable and still wanted her. She was tired of being afraid, tired of letting the fire and Martin's rejection dictate how she lived her life. "I am ready," she whispered. "I want this. I want you." Isaac smiled and kissed her again, then gently guided her toward the bed. What followed was tender and careful, Isaac taking his time to learn what made her gasp with pleasure and adjusting when she needed him to be careful of her damaged skin. He kissed her scars, tracing them with his lips and murmuring words of praise and reassurance, until Victoria stopped thinking of them as ugly marks and started seeing them as just another part of herself. When they finally came together fully, it felt like a homecoming, like two damaged pieces fitting together to create something whole and right. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Victoria's bed, Isaac's arm draped protectively across her waist. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I know it has only been 2 months, but I love you, Victoria. I think I started falling for you the moment you stepped off that stagecoach looking terrified but determined." Victoria turned in his arms so she could see his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both strange and right on her tongue. "I did not think I would ever trust anyone enough to love them again, but you have been so patient, so kind. You have made me believe that maybe I deserve happiness after all." "You deserve all the happiness in the world," Isaac said firmly, pulling her closer. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time since the fire, Victoria slept through the night without nightmares. The seasons changed, summer fading into a golden autumn and then a mild California winter. Victoria's life settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural, increasingly like home. She took over more of the ranch management, proving to have a good head for numbers and organization that helped Isaac plan for the future. They talked about building onto the house, adding more rooms for the children they both hoped to have eventually. The nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, Victoria woke to find Isaac already awake beside her, ready to hold her until the terror passed. She learned his nightmares too, the ones where he watched his father collapse in the barn or heard his mother's labored breathing in her final days. They held each other through the dark moments and celebrated the bright ones, building a marriage based on genuine partnership and deepening love. In March of 1874, Victoria realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another 2 weeks before telling Isaac, wanting to be certain, and when she finally shared the news over breakfast one morning, his whoop of joy could probably be heard all the way to town. He picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, laughing and kissing her until they were both dizzy. "We are going to be parents," he said, his hands resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child is growing right here. Are you happy?" Victoria asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. "I am more than happy," Isaac said seriously. "I am blessed beyond measure. A year ago, I was alone on this ranch, convinced I would spend the rest of my life as a bachelor because I was too awkward to court properly and too proud to admit I was lonely. Then you came into my life, brave and beautiful and stronger than you know. Now we are going to have a baby together. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite Victoria's concerns that her scarred skin might cause complications. The local doctor, a gruff but competent man named Reynolds, examined her and declared that the scarring on her torso should not affect her ability to carry or deliver a child. Isaac fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and avoid heavy work, until Victoria had to laugh and remind him that pregnant women had been doing chores for thousands of years without incident. Their son was born in November of 1874, a healthy baby with dark hair and his father's brown eyes. They named him Thomas Isaac Jameson, honoring both Victoria's lost brother and his father. Isaac cried when he held his son for the first time, tears of joy streaming down his weathered face as he marveled at the tiny fingers and toes. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered. "You made something perfect, Victoria." "We made him together," Victoria corrected, exhausted but happy as she watched her husband cradle their newborn with infinite care. "He is ours." Thomas was an easy baby, content to sleep in the cradle Isaac had carved and decorated with careful detail. Victoria nursed him and sang lullabies her own mother had sung to her, finding healing in the act of giving her son the love and attention she had once received. Isaac was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, freeing Victoria to rest and recover from the birth. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that revolved around Thomas's needs and the ongoing work of the ranch. Isaac hired a young man named Peter to help with the cattle work, giving him more time to spend with his growing family. Victoria joined the ladies' sewing circle in town, making friends with the other ranch wives who welcomed her warmly and admired her skill with a needle. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's steady temperament and his mother's quick mind. When he was 2, Victoria gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, a tiny girl with blonde hair and green eyes who looked nothing like either parent but whom they loved fiercely nonetheless. 2 years after that came another son, William, who had Victoria's dark hair and a loud voice that announced his opinions from birth. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family. Isaac adding on rooms and a second story with the help of neighbors who came together for a barn-raising style construction party. The ranch prospered as cattle prices rose, and Isaac's reputation for quality stock spread throughout the region. Victoria started a small business making custom dresses and selling them through the general store in town, using her sewing skills to bring in extra income and maintain a sense of independence. On their 10th wedding anniversary in July of 1883, Isaac surprised Victoria with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Isaac's cousin and her husband, who had moved to the area 2 years earlier, and took the train to the city. Victoria had not been to a real city since leaving Philadelphia, and she found herself overwhelmed by the noise and crowds and endless buildings. But Isaac held her hand and guided her through it all, taking her to fancy restaurants and a theater performance and a photographer's studio where they had their portrait taken together. On their last night in the city, as they lay in the hotel bed with the sounds of San Francisco filtering through the window, Isaac turned to Victoria and took her hand. "I have something I need to say, and I want you to really hear me. These past 10 years have been the happiest of my life. You took a lonely cowboy and made him into a husband and father. You brought joy and laughter and love into a house that was just empty rooms before you arrived. I know our beginning was unconventional, and I know you came to me carrying wounds that had not healed. But you trusted me with your heart and your scars and your fears, and I want you to know that I have never once regretted sending that advertisement or opening your letter or waiting at that stagecoach station." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from being overwhelmed with love. "You saved me," she said quietly. "I did not realize how lost I was until I found you. You showed me that my scars did not define me, that I could still be loved and wanted and valued despite carrying visible proof of my pain. You gave me a home and a family and a future I stopped believing I could have. I love you more now than I did on our first anniversary, and I loved you more then than I did on our wedding day. Every year with you has been a gift." Isaac kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. "Here is to 50 more years of gifts," he murmured against her lips. "Here is to growing old together on our ranch, surrounded by our children and eventually our grandchildren. Here is to a lifetime of choosing each other, every single day." "I will choose you every time," Victoria promised. "Every single time." They returned to the ranch renewed and recommitted, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. They lost crops to drought and cattle to disease. They celebrated as Thomas grew into a serious young man who shared his father's love of ranching, as Margaret proved to be a talented artist who filled the house with her drawings and paintings, as William discovered a gift for numbers and talked about becoming a banker. In 1891, Thomas married a neighbor's daughter, a capable young woman named Sarah who took to ranch life like she was born to it. They built a small house on the western edge of the property and began their own family, making Isaac and Victoria grandparents at the still relatively young ages of 45 and 40. Victoria held her first grandchild, a baby girl named Victoria after her, and marveled at the beautiful symmetry of life that had brought her from the ashes of loss to this moment of pure joy. Margaret moved to Sacramento when she was 21 to study art at a new academy there, sending home letters filled with descriptions of her classes and the exciting cultural life of the state capital. William, true to his early interest, went to work at the bank in Placerville and showed such aptitude that he was promoted to assistant manager within 3 years. Through it all, Isaac and Victoria remained the steady center of their growing family. They were the ones everyone came to for advice, for comfort, for celebration. Their love for each other was obvious to everyone who knew them. Visible in the way, Isaac still brought Victoria wildflowers 40 years after their awkward beginning. In the way Victoria still packed Isaac's favorite foods when he had to travel for cattle sales. In the way they sat together on the porch every evening and talked about their day. On a warm summer evening in 1903, 30 years to the day after Victoria had arrived in Placerville as a frightened mail-order bride, she and Isaac sat on that same porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray and their faces lined with the marks of lives fully lived. 3 grandchildren played in the yard under Thomas and Sarah's watchful eyes, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "You remember the day we met?" Isaac asked, his hand clasped firmly in Victoria's. "Every detail," Victoria said. "I was so certain you would take one look at me and realize you had made a terrible mistake. I had no idea that the man waiting for me at that stagecoach would become the love of my life." "I was terrified," Isaac admitted with a laugh. "I kept thinking you would find me too rough, too unsophisticated for a city woman. I had practiced what to say to you for weeks, and when you actually stepped down from that coach, every word flew right out of my head." Victoria smiled, remembering that younger version of Isaac with his serious expression and careful manners. "You asked if I wanted to freshen up before the wedding. And you said you wanted to proceed immediately, and I thought my heart would stop because I figured it meant you hated me on sight and just wanted to get the ordeal over with," Isaac said, shaking his head. "I had no idea you were just as scared as I was." "We were both scared," Victoria agreed. "But we found our way to each other despite the fear. Or maybe because of it. Maybe being vulnerable together from the beginning gave us a stronger foundation than we would have had otherwise." Isaac lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture he had performed thousands of times over their 30 years together, but which still made Victoria's heart flutter. "You know what I remember most about that day? The moment you looked at me with those beautiful eyes and I thought, please let her give me a chance. Please let me prove I can make her happy. I would have done anything, been anything, just to earn your trust and eventually your love." "You did not have to be anything other than yourself," Victoria said softly. "You just had to be Isaac, the man who saw my scars and called them beautiful. The man who held me through nightmares and taught me to ride and courted me after we were already married. The man who gave me a home and a family and showed me that my past did not have to define my future." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky deepened from orange to purple to the deep blue of true evening. The grandchildren were called inside by Sarah, their protests fading as they went. Lights began appearing in windows up and down the valley as other families settled in for the night. "I love you, Victoria Jameson," Isaac said into the gathering darkness. "I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for however many more years God grants us. You are the best decision I ever made, the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you are my miracle," Victoria replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The unexpected gift I did not know I was receiving when I boarded that train in Philadelphia. You took a broken woman and loved her back to wholeness. You gave me reasons to stop hiding and start living fully. I am so grateful that I answered your advertisement all those years ago." "Best letter I ever received," Isaac said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And the best day of my life was when you stepped off that stagecoach and into my heart." They stayed on the porch until full darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, bright and clear in the California sky. Inside the house, they had built together, filled with memories of love and laughter and the occasional tears that came with any real life. They finally rose and went inside hand in hand. Their bedroom was on the ground floor now, easier on aging knees than climbing stairs, but it held the same brass bed from Victoria's first room and the same wedding ring quilt that had welcomed her to the ranch 30 years earlier. As they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar rhythms of a long marriage, Victoria caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her scars were still there, visible in the gap of her nightgown, but she barely noticed them anymore. They were just part of her body, part of her story, no more significant than the freckles on her arms or the small scar on her hand from a kitchen knife mishap 10 years ago. Isaac had been right all along. They were simply proof that she had survived, that she had fought to live, and that she had been given a second chance at happiness. Isaac came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "What are you thinking about?" "How different my life might have been if Martin had not been a coward," Victoria said. "I would have married him and lived a small, careful life in Philadelphia, always hiding my scars and my grief. I never would have come west. I never would have met you. I never would have had Thomas or Margaret or William or any of our grandchildren. One man's cruelty led to more blessings than I can count. Then I suppose I should be grateful to Martin for being too foolish to see what he had," Isaac said, his voice warm with humor. "Though if I ever meet him, I will still want to punch him in the nose for hurting you." Victoria laughed and turned in his arms to face him properly. "My fierce protector, even after all these years." "Always," Isaac promised. "Until my last breath, I will protect you and love you and thank God for bringing you into my life." They climbed into bed together, fitting against each other with the ease of decades of practice. As Victoria drifted toward sleep, warm and safe in her husband's arms, she thought about the frightened young woman who had arrived in Placerville 30 years ago. That woman could never have imagined the life she would build here, the love she would find, the family she would create from the ashes of her past. If she could go back and tell her younger self anything, it would be this: trust the journey. Trust the cowboy who meets you at the stagecoach. Trust that your scars do not make you unlovable, but rather make you uniquely beautiful to the right person. Trust that happiness is still possible, even after unimaginable loss. But she could not go back, and she did not need to. That frightened young woman had found her way forward, had found Isaac and love, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. The mail-order bride with the shameful scars had become the beloved wife and mother and grandmother, surrounded by family and secure in the knowledge that she was cherished exactly as she was. "I love you," she murmured, half asleep. "I love you too," Isaac whispered back. "Always and forever." And in the quiet California night, surrounded by the land they had worked together for 3 decades, and the family they had created through love and determination, Victoria Zimmerman Jameson closed her eyes and slept peacefully, finally and completely at home.